Welcome to Fishing with Dave on Channel 43 Public Access. Here's your host, Captain Dave.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I was thinking the other day about where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, and how strange it is that something designed to teach us geography ended up teaching us so much more than that. It wasn't flashy, it didn't shout at you, it didn't try to trick you into learning, it just trusted the curiosity would do the work if you gave it the space. And it worked. I remember sitting there as a kid, staring at the screen, reading every clue like it mattered to me, I wasn't even skimming it or rushing it, like you would do with, I don't know, a book they assigned in class. Actual thinking needed to be done in order to play the game. Carmen had been spotted somewhere, and suddenly the whole world felt alive. Cities weren't just names anymore, Countries weren't abstract shapes on a map that you look at in class when you're bored, you know. They were places with landmarks and currencies and languages and history, and the next clue could send you anywhere. See, that was the hook. Not dopamine or, explosions or anything like that, but rewards. The reward was mystery. I would rack my brain over those clues, height measurements and climate hints and cultural references in South America that I barely understood at the time, but it felt important to me because, you were like a detective. And who doesn't want to be a detective like Batman, right? So you're sitting there thinking, wait, no, that doesn't sound like Europe. That sounds like, somewhere on the coast, in South America or, I don't know, Africa. You weren't just guessing. It was like you were reasoning with the clues. And when you got it right, it felt earned. That's the part people forget. Learning felt good because you had to work for it. Your brain was doing something real. You weren't being led by the hand, you're being invited to participate. That's the quiet magic of edutainment when it's done right. Back then, the line between learning and play wasn't treated like a problem that needed solving. It was treated like an opportunity. You could learn something without it being wrapped in neon plastic and disguised as a shadow reward loop. The game respected you enough to assure you were capable of thinking. I didn't know it at the time, but that respect mattered. It planted something, a sense that knowledge wasn't boring, that curiosity wasn't just work, that the world was huge and strange and worth paying attention to, all because some fictional thief in a red coat kept slipping away at the last second. And let's be honest, Carmen herself was pretty cool. There was mystery there, style, a sense that intelligence and cleverness were traits worth admiring. She wasn't a villain you hated, she was a puzzle you wanted to understand. And she sounded really hot on that cartoon. I can't be the only one that thought she was hot, right? Anyways, somewhere along the way, edutainment became a dirty word. It was learning had to be disguised so heavily that it barely resembled itself anymore. Everything needed points, and everything needed to be unlocked. Everything needed to be optimized for engagement metrics instead of understanding. Worse than that, greed crept in. Wherever there's something good, greed will always come in and ruin it, it seems. Suddenly, it wasn't about making something good, it was about making something profitable, scalable. Talent took a back seat to branding. Curiosity was replaced with retention strategies. The joy of discovery was swapped out for shallow stimulation. You can feel it when something is made by people who don't care. The old edutainment, games care deeply, about the history, about language, geography, all that stuff, like the Oregon Trail, what is that? Word munchers, number munchers, that was a good one. I forget the one where you were the guy in the TV station and you had the remote control to zap robots and you had to answer problems and all that jazz. That was a good one too. You could feel it when something is made with respect for the audience. When you strip that away, all you're left with with something grand. Edutainment now sucks. You know, Carmen Sandiego, that was the fun one. That was the stuff that was great. And the truth is, learning and gaming are beautiful when mixed together. It's a shame that none of that seems to matter because everybody's just so gosh darn greedy. Carmen Sandiego proved that decades ago that edutainment could be profitable and fun and, all this stuff. It proved that kids would willingly spend hours thinking and researching and making connections and failing occasionally, if they followed the wrong clues or whatever. It proved that mystery is more powerful than spectacle. It proved that imagination fills in the gaps better than graphics ever could. That's why I like text adventures. I still remember that feeling of chasing Carmen across the globe. I still remember the frustration of missing a warrant by one detail. Still remember the satisfaction of finally putting the pieces together. Those memories stuck because my brain was involved, because I wasn't just consuming something, I was participating. See, that's the part I miss. That's not just in games, but everywhere. We don't lack technology, we don't lack resources, we don't lack platforms, but what we do lack is the willingness to trust people to think, to sit them down with uncertainty, to enjoy the process instead of rushing to the outcome. You see, Carmen was always one step ahead. And that was the point. You weren't supposed to catch her easily. You were supposed to learn. Maybe that's the real lesson in edutainment, Had been trying to teach us all along. That the chase matters more than the capture. That curiosity is its own reward. That knowledge sticks when you earn it. And that learning, when treated with respect, can be just as thrilling as any other game ever made. Also, let's be honest, that theme song absolutely ruled. It kicked a lot of butt. Some things don't need to be improved. They just need to be remembered. Maybe that memory needs to be kept alive. Maybe those values need to be revisited. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a guy who makes programs in QBasic, sitting on a lake, catching virtual fish. Sounds pretty nice when you say it out loud like that. Until next time, adventurers, take care. May your lantern light your way.